Serenity Valley Stories introduces The Wendigo by the Frozen Lake. I write this with trembling hands, still haunted by the memories of that day. The images refuse to fade, no matter how many times I try to push them away. The snow, the lake, the Wendigo, everything about that place is seared into my mind, a relentless reminder of what I survived, and what my friend did not. I don't expect you to believe me, but I need to tell this story. Maybe, somehow, it'll help me make sense of what happened. Maybe it'll help me sleep again. It was supposed to be a simple trip, just a weekend getaway in the wilderness to clear our heads. Mike and I had been friends since high school, and we'd done plenty of these trips before. We both loved the isolation, the peace that came with being miles away from anyone else. But this time was different. The snow was thicker, the cold sharper, and the silence was more oppressive than I'd ever felt before. We set out early in the morning, snowmobiles roaring to life as we left the small cabin we'd rented behind. The sky was a dull gray, heavy with the promise of more snow, but we didn't care. The fresh air and the thrill of the ride were all we needed. The plan was to head toward a frozen lake we'd spotted on the map, spend the day exploring, maybe even do a bit of ice fishing. It seemed like a perfect day. It wasn't long before we reached the lake, its surface a vast expanse of white, perfectly still, perfectly silent. The snow crunched under our boots as we dismounted, our breath visible in the frigid air. We spent some time setting up a small camp, just a place to warm up and store our gear. The lake was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're the last person on Earth. I don't know when I first noticed the tracks. They were just there, suddenly, like they'd appeared out of nowhere. Large, deep prints in the snow, leading from the tree line down toward the lake. They weren't animal tracks, not any animal I knew, anyway. They were too big, too elongated, with a strange pattern that didn't make sense. Mike noticed them too, and I could tell he was uneasy. He laughed it off, though, said it was probably just some weird trick of the snow. But I could see the doubt in his eyes. We followed the tracks for a while, our curiosity getting the better of us. They led us closer to the trees, where the forest seemed darker, denser. The further we went, the more the feeling of dread grew in my chest. Something was wrong. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, like a warning that we were getting too close to something we shouldn't. Then, without warning, my snowmobile sputtered and died. One moment I was cruising through the snow, and the next, I was stranded, the engine silent and unresponsive. Mike pulled up beside me, frowning as he tried to figure out what was wrong. We both checked the snowmobile, but nothing seemed out of place. It just stopped working. That's when the unease turned into fear. We were miles from the cabin, deep in the wilderness, and the sun was starting to dip behind the trees. The temperature was dropping fast, and we knew we had to get moving if we wanted to make it back before nightfall. Mike suggested we try to walk back to the lake, maybe see if we could get my snowmobile running again. But I knew, deep down, that something wasn't right. The tracks, the silence, the broken snowmobile, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle we didn't want to solve. We hadn't made it far when we heard the first sound. It was faint, almost indistinguishable from the wind, but it was there, a low, guttural growl that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Mike heard it too, and for the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. We both turned toward the trees, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement, but there was nothing. Just the endless forest, silent and still. The growl came again, louder this time, and closer. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could see my breath coming out in quick, panicked puffs. We were being hunted, I knew it, Mike knew it, but neither of us said a word. We just started running, back toward the lake, back toward the camp, hoping against hope that we could outrun whatever was out there. But the thing about the wilderness is, you can't outrun it. The snow drags at your feet, the cold saps your strength, and every step feels like a battle. The growling grew louder, and I could hear branches snapping, something big moving through the trees behind us. Mike was ahead of me, pushing through the snow with a desperation I'd never seen before. I wanted to yell at him to slow down, to stay together, but I couldn't find my voice. All I could do was run, my legs burning, my lungs screaming for air. We burst out of the trees and onto the frozen lake, the surface a stark, featureless white under the darkening sky. Mike stopped, looking back at me with wild eyes. "We have to keep moving," I shouted, but he shook his head, staring at something over my shoulder. I turned, and there it was. A shape, barely visible in the gathering darkness, standing at the edge of the trees. Tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that seemed to stretch unnaturally long. Its eyes, if they were eyes, glowed faintly, a sickly yellow that pierced through the gloom. The air around it felt wrong, heavy, like it was pressing down on me, suffocating me. "Run!" I screamed, and we did. We ran across the frozen lake, the ice cracking under our feet with every step. I could hear it behind us, moving impossibly fast, closing the distance between us with terrifying speed. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how to survive, how to escape this nightmare. And then I remembered the flare gun. It was in my pack, a last resort tool we'd brought in case we got lost. My hands were shaking as I pulled it out, fumbling with the safety. I could hear Mike shouting something, but his words were lost in the wind, drowned out by the pounding of my own heartbeat. I turned, aimed the flare gun at the creature, and fired. The flare shot out with a brilliant flash of red light, arcing through the air before landing in the snow a few feet from the creature. For a moment, the entire landscape was bathed in an eerie red glow, and I saw it clearly for the first time. It wasn't human, no, it was something far worse. Its body was gaunt, skeletal, with skin stretched tight over bones that seemed ready to burst through. Its face was a twisted mockery of a man's, with hollow eyes and a mouth that hung open, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. It let out a howl, a sound that cut through the night and sent a jolt of terror through my entire being. But the flare did something. The creature recoiled, its movements jerky and unnatural, like it was being pulled away by some invisible force. It retreated, back into the shadows, back into the forest, but I knew it wasn't gone. It was waiting, watching. I grabbed Mike, pulling him toward the other side of the lake, toward the cabin that was now our only hope of survival. He was resisting, his face pale and his eyes wide with fear. "We have to go," I shouted, but he just stood there, staring at the trees. "It's still there," he whispered, his voice trembling. "It's waiting for us." I didn't have time to argue. I grabbed him by the arm and dragged him along, forcing him to move. The cabin was our only chance. If we could just get inside, maybe we could hold out until morning, maybe we could survive this. We reached the edge of the lake, and I could see the cabin through the trees, its windows dark and foreboding. But something was wrong. Mike was slowing down, his steps faltering, and when I looked back at him, I saw that his face had gone white, his eyes wide and unfocused. I can't go any further," he gasped, sinking to his knees in the snow. "Get up!" I yelled, panic rising in my throat. "We have to keep moving." But he didn't move. He just sat there, staring at the ground, his breath coming in ragged gasps. I tried to pull him up, tried to drag him to his feet, but he pushed me away, his strength surprising. "It's too late," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's already here." And then I saw it, the shadow, moving through the trees, getting closer. The Wendigo. I could feel its presence, the cold seeping into my bones, the fear taking hold of my mind. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't leave him, but I couldn't stay either. The cabin was so close, just a few more steps. But Mike wouldn't move. He just sat there, resigned, as if he knew something I didn't. I could hear the creature getting closer, the sound of its breathing, the crunch of snow under its feet. "I'm sorry," I whispered, tears freezing on my cheeks. "I'm so sorry." And then I ran. I ran to the cabin, leaving Mike behind, leaving my friend to whatever fate awaited him. I didn't want to, but I had no choice. I could hear him shouting my name, hear his screams echoing through the forest, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just kept running, kept pushing forward, until I reached the door of the cabin and threw myself inside. I bolted the door, barricaded it with whatever I could find, and collapsed on the floor, my body shaking uncontrollably. The screams had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that was somehow worse. I knew what that meant, but I refused to believe it. Mike was gone, taken by the Wendigo, and there was nothing I could do. I stayed in that cabin all night, clutching the flare gun like it was the only thing keeping me alive. The wind howled outside, and every creak, every groan of the wood made my heart skip a beat. I knew it was out there, waiting, just beyond the door. When morning came, I ventured outside, half expecting to see Mike's body in the snow. But there was nothing, no tracks, no blood, no sign that anyone had been there at all. The only thing that remained was the deep, unsettling fear that had taken root in my soul. I made it back to civilization, but I was never the same. The Wendigo had taken more than just my friend, it had taken a part of me too, a part that would never be whole again. I live with the guilt, the fear, and the regret every day, knowing that I left my friend behind to save myself. And every winter, when the snow falls and the wind howls, I think about that frozen lake, that dark forest, and the creature that haunts it. I don't know what happened to Mike, if he's dead, or worse, but I do know one thing. The Wendigo is still out there, waiting, hungry, and it's only a matter of time before it finds another victim. Thank you for listening to Serenity Valley Stories, and please don't forget to like, subscribe, comment down below, share with your friends, and check out the other stories on the channel.